My name is Emily Carter, I'm 25 years old, and this story is not easy for me to tell. I grew up with two fathers in my life. My biological dad left when I was still a little girl, and when I was 10, my mom remarried a man named Mark Reynolds. From the start, Mark treated me like his own. He wasn't the kind of stepdad who kept his distance or just paid the bills. He showed up. He came to school plays, he taught me how to ride a bike, he even stayed up late helping me study for math tests when my mom had to work overtime. In every way that mattered, Mark was my dad. But along with Mark came his son, Jake Reynolds. Jake was a year older than me, and he made it very clear that he didn't like sharing his father. Where I found love and support from Mark, Jake found jealousy. He hated that his dad spent so much time with me. He treated me like I was some outsider invading his family. Over the years, he called me names, excluded me, and went out of his way to remind me that I wasn't really a Reynolds. My mom tried to keep the peace, but Jake never warmed up to me, no matter how kind I tried to be. Still, I never let his attitude come between me and Mark. I loved that man. He was steady, patient, and always had this way of making me feel safe even when everything else in my life was falling apart. Losing him felt unthinkable, but life doesn't wait for anyone. Last year, Mark passed away suddenly from a heart attack. The shock broke me in ways I didn't even know were possible. He was only 55, and I thought we had so much more time together. When the burial was arranged, I wanted to be there for him. I wanted to stand beside the man who had raised me and say goodbye properly. I wanted to grieve with the family that he had built, even if one person in that family never accepted me. But Jake had other ideas. He made sure I felt like I didn't belong. On the very day we laid Mark to rest, I tried to walk into the house where people were gathering before the burial. And that's when Jake stopped me. He stood in the doorway with this cold expression, and in front of relatives and neighbors, he told me I wasn't welcome there. He said this was his father's house, and I had no right to be part of it. My legs went weak. I couldn't believe the cruelty coming from someone who had grown up in the same home as me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. This isn't just about grief. It's about betrayal, about the lines family can cross, and about the revenge I never thought I'd be driven to take. Mark's death came like a lightning strike. One moment he was laughing with a neighbor over the fence, and the next he was gone, taken by a heart attack that nobody saw coming. The house felt strange without him. Silence filled every corner, and it was the kind of silence that pressed down on you until you could hardly breathe. I kept waiting for him to walk through the door, call me by the nickname only he used, or ask if I wanted to go grab ice cream like we did on hard days. But that never happened again. As the days blurred, the funeral arrangements began. That's when the cracks in everything widened. I wanted to help, to make sure things were handled the way Mark would have wanted. But Jake took control instantly, as if it was his stage and I had no part to play. He made calls without me, met with the pastor on his own, and dismissed every suggestion I tried to offer. When I asked about the flowers, he said sharply, "This isn't your decision." When I brought up music, he rolled his eyes and muttered, "You don't get a say." It wasn't about flowers or music, though. It was about erasing me. He wanted everyone to see him as the only child, the only one who mattered in Mark's life. I could feel it in the way he spoke, in the way he brushed past me like I was invisible. Relatives noticed too, but they stayed quiet, maybe because it was easier not to stir up trouble during such a heavy week. Each time Jake shut me out, it cut deeper. Mark had been the person I leaned on, the one steady thing when the world tilted. And now, even in his death, Jake was pulling him away from me. The man who raised me, who guided me through every storm, was being turned into a prize that Jake could guard and claim as his alone. The tension grew thicker every day. I could feel the heat of it whenever Jake and I were in the same room. He carried himself with this hard certainty, like he had already won some battle I never agreed to fight. I tried to remind myself that grief can twist people, make them cruel, make them lash out. But deep down I knew this wasn't grief. This was something Jake had been waiting for, a chance to push me out completely. Standing there, watching him choose caskets and readings as though I wasn't even in the room, I felt a mix of anger and sorrow I couldn't untangle. It wasn't just losing Mark, it was being told that my love for him didn't count, that my place in his life was disposable. And as much as it hurt, I could feel something else beginning to rise inside me, something that wouldn't let this go quietly. The morning of the burial was gray, the kind of sky that seemed to press down on the earth. I dressed carefully, choosing something simple but respectful, and carried a small basket of food I had prepared for the people gathering after the service. It felt like the one thing I could contribute, a way of showing love in a place where words had failed me. My hands shook as I walked up the front steps, but I told myself I belonged there. When I reached the door, I could hear voices inside, the low murmur of relatives who had already arrived. The smell of coffee drifted out, mingling with the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. I took a steady breath, but before I could step in, Jake appeared. He blocked the entrance with his body, his face set like stone. "You shouldn't be here," he said flatly. For a second, I thought I misheard. This was the house where I had spent years growing up, the place where I had shared meals, laughter, and memories with the man we were supposed to be honoring that. My throat tightened. "I came to help," I whispered, trying to steady my voice. Jake's reply was sharp, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "This isn't your family's gathering. You need to leave." The air seemed to freeze. Heads turned inside the living room, eyes landing on me with a mix of confusion and discomfort. I felt dozens of gazes pressing into me, waiting to see how I would react. My chest burned, but no words came out. The basket I carried suddenly felt unbearably heavy in my arm. Jake didn't lower his voice. He didn't step aside. He wanted the humiliation to be public, deliberate. "You don't belong here, Emily," he said again, each word like a blow. Something inside me cracked. On the very day I wanted nothing more than to stand quietly in the background, to honor the man who had given me a sense of home, I was being pushed out in front of everyone. I caught the eye of an older aunt who looked away quickly, her lips pressed tight as if she didn't dare intervene. No one spoke. No one stopped him. I felt the blood rush to my face, the sting of tears I refused to let fall in front of him. My fingers clenched around the basket, and for a moment I thought I might drop it right there on the porch. The world blurred, voices turning into a low hum as if I were underwater. I turned away slowly, each step heavier than the last. The sound of the door shutting behind me echoed in my chest, final and cruel. On the hardest day of my life, instead of comfort, I was met with rejection. The weight of that moment pressed down harder than the grief itself, leaving me hollow, humiliated, and unable to breathe. I didn't make it far before the tears spilled. My vision blurred as I walked down the quiet street, the basket still clutched against me, though I couldn't even feel its weight anymore. Each step pulled me deeper into memories I couldn't hold back. I saw myself as a little girl wobbling on a bike while Mark jogged beside me, steadying the handlebars with his strong hand until I finally found balance. I heard his laugh again, that warm, steady sound that always made me believe I could do anything. Another memory surfaced, those early mornings when he walked me to school. He carried my backpack when it was too heavy, asked about my spelling tests, and reminded me that being kind mattered more than being popular. He never made me feel like a burden. Instead, he carried the role of father effortlessly, as if it had always been his. Then came the memory of my teenage years, when life felt overwhelming and confusing. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by college brochures. Mark stayed up past midnight, circling deadlines on a calendar, reviewing essays, pushing me to aim higher than I thought I could. When I doubted myself, he told me I was more than capable. Without him, I never would have made it to university. The ache in my chest deepened with every recollection. These moments weren't just fragments of the past. They were proof of the bond we had, proof Jake could never touch, no matter how hard he tried to shove me out. Mark had chosen me. He had invested in me, guided me, loved me, and nothing Jake said or did could rewrite that truth. I stopped walking and pressed my back against a tree, trying to breathe through the storm inside me. The sting of humiliation from being turned away was still fresh, but beneath it, something else was forming. A quiet, steady determination began to take root, stronger than the grief and sharper than the humiliation. Jake might have slammed a door in my face, but he could never erase what Mark and I shared. He could try to paint me as an outsider, but I knew the truth of the years behind me. Every memory was a shield, every lesson Mark gave me was armor. And in that moment, I promised myself I wouldn't let this end with me being cast aside. I wouldn't let Jake rewrite the story of who mattered in Mark's life. He could strip me of a seat at the table for one day, but he wouldn't take away my place forever. The vow wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted or written down. It lived quietly inside me, steady and certain. Something in me shifted that day, a seed planted deep. Revenge wasn't about shouting or fighting on the porch. It would be about patience, about proving the truth, about taking back what Jake thought he had stolen. The weeks after the burial moved slowly, each day weighed down by emptiness. I tried to throw myself into work and daily routines, but grief has a way of creeping into every corner. Then one afternoon, I received a call that shifted everything. It was Mark's lawyer, requesting that I come to his office to discuss the will. For a moment, I hesitated, convinced it must be a mistake. I wasn't expecting to be included in anything. Jake had made it clear he considered himself the sole heir, and after the way he pushed me aside, I assumed he had taken over every detail. When I mentioned the meeting to Jake, his reaction was telling. His jaw tightened, and he snapped that there was nothing for me, that the estate was his responsibility alone. "Don't waste your time," he said coldly. "Dad didn't leave you anything." His words stung, but the defensiveness in his tone lit a spark of suspicion. If there was truly nothing meant for me, why was he so quick to shut me down? I went to the lawyer's office anyway. The space smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, and as I sat across from the desk, my heart pounded in my chest. The lawyer opened a folder and slid several documents across to me. Among them was the will. My eyes skimmed the lines, struggling to process what I was reading. Mark had not only included me, he had left me the house. The very home where I had grown up, where my happiest memories lived, where Jake had tried to lock me out. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, but the surprises weren't finished. The lawyer also handed me a bundle of envelopes tied together with string. He wanted you to have these, he said gently. Inside were letters written in Mark's familiar handwriting. Each one carried words that broke me open in a new way. He spoke about how proud he was of me, how much he admired my strength, how grateful he was to have raised me. In one he wrote, "You are my daughter in every way that matters." Nothing could ever change that. I pressed the paper to my chest, tears falling freely. For the first time since his death, I felt his presence again, steady, reassuring, reminding me that my place in his life was undeniable. Jake's behavior made sudden, perfect sense. He hadn't been protecting Mark's memory. He had been protecting his own selfish hold on everything. He knew about the will, and he had been hoping to bury it along with his father, to erase me legally just as he tried to erase me emotionally. But the truth was now in my hands, written in Mark's own words. The man who raised me had left behind more than memories. He had left proof. Proof that I was his family, no matter what Jake said. Proof that the house and the bond inside it belonged with me. I left the lawyer's office clutching the documents and letters like they were lifeline. For days I debated how to approach Jake, running through conversations in my head, imagining ways to stay calm. But the anger inside me wouldn't rest. Eventually, I drove to the house, parked outside, and walked up the same steps where he had once blocked me. This time, I refused to back down. Jake was in the living room when I entered. He didn't even look surprised, just annoyed, as if my presence was an inconvenience. I set the folder on the coffee table and pushed it toward him. "I know about the will," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Mark left the house to me." For a moment, he froze. His eyes flicked over the papers, then back to me. Instead of admitting anything, his face twisted with contempt. "You think a piece of paper makes you his kid," he snapped. "He was never really your father. You were just the stray my dad felt sorry for." The words hit like a slap. My chest tightened, but I stood my ground. "You can lie to yourself all you want, Jake, but he loved me. I have his letters. I know what I meant to him." That's when his mask slipped entirely. He leaned forward, his voice sharp and ugly. "You're nothing but a gold digger, Em. You used him, and now you want to steal everything he built. This house, this family, it's mine. It always has been." The accusation burned. Gold digger. As if the years of memories, the countless times Mark had shown up for me, were some kind of con. As if the bond we had shared was just a scheme. Hearing Jake reduce everything to greed revealed the truth about him. This wasn't grief speaking. This wasn't about missing his father. This was about control, about cutting me out completely, about winning a battle he had been fighting since childhood. I looked at him and saw clearly for the first time. Every cruel remark, every attempt to shove me aside, every glare at family gatherings, it had all been leading here. He hadn't just disliked me. He had been waiting for the chance to erase me once and for all. Something inside me hardened. I realized no amount of reasoning would ever change Jake. He would lie, cheat, and manipulate to protect his claim. He had been plotting from the start, and if I didn't fight, he would succeed. I gathered the folder and letters, tucking them back under my arm. "You can call me whatever you want," I said quietly, "but the truth is in black and white, and I'm not going anywhere." The fury in his eyes told me he understood. This wasn't over. And in that moment, my grief sharpened into resolve. If Jake wanted a battle, I was ready to give him one. The next step was clear. I couldn't let Jake's words or anger scare me into silence. Within days, I contacted an attorney recommended by a coworker. Sitting across from her in a small office, I laid out everything. The will, the letters, the way Jake had tried to shut me out. She listened carefully, nodding, and when I finished, she assured me I had a solid case. Hearing that gave me strength I didn't know I still had. For once, the fight wouldn't be mine alone. Filing the challenge set off a storm. Jake came at me immediately, acting like I was betraying the family by taking legal action. He started calling relatives, twisting the story to make me sound greedy. According to him, I had swooped in only after Mark was gone, sniffing around for money and property. He painted himself as the dutiful son, the one protecting his father's legacy from an opportunist. Some relatives repeated his words back to me, unsure what to believe. Each rumor stung, but I refused to back down. Court proceedings began, and the tension grew thicker with every passing week. Jake arrived at hearings with an air of confidence, as though charm alone would sway the judge. He wore the mask of a grieving son, but I had the truth. When my lawyer placed Mark's handwritten letters into evidence, the tone in the room shifted. The words were undeniable. They revealed a man who spoke of me not as an outsider, but as his child, someone he loved and trusted with his home. Jake's bravado cracked when documents showed how he had tried to conceal parts of the estate from me. Emails, notes, and testimony from the lawyer proved he knew exactly what Mark had left behind. His claim that I had no place in the inheritance began to unravel. Watching his expression darken as each piece of evidence was laid out was both painful and satisfying. The hardest part wasn't the legal jargon or the paperwork. It was seeing relatives I cared about pulled into the middle. Some of them had believed Jake's version at first, but as the truth unfolded, their trust in him wavered. A cousin who once ignored my calls now reached out to apologize. An uncle who had stood behind Jake quietly admitted he wasn't sure who to believe anymore. The shift was small at first, but it grew stronger as more details surfaced. For the first time since the funeral, I felt like the tide was turning. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming my place, proving that what Mark and I had shared couldn't be erased by jealousy or each hearing, each document, each letter read aloud brought me closer to that. Jake tried everything to hold on: guilt, manipulation, even anger. But with every attempt, more people saw through him. The image of the devoted son cracked, and beneath it, his bitterness was plain for everyone to see. The day of the ruling arrived with a chill in the air, the kind that seeped into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. I sat in the courtroom, hands folded tightly in my lap, waiting for words that would decide the battle I had been dragged into. The judge reviewed the paperwork one last time, his voice calm, steady, and final. When he declared that the property belonged to me, not Jake, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't joy exactly. It was relief, sharp and undeniable. Across the aisle, Jake's face told a different story. His jaw locked, his fists clenched, and he refused to look at me. He had strutted through this entire process, as if the outcome was certain, but now the mask had crumbled. The order was clear. He had to vacate the house. For a moment, I remembered standing at that doorway weeks earlier, when he blocked me from entering, telling me I didn't belong. Watching him lose the very place he had used as a weapon against me was its own kind of justice. There was no need for me to gloat. I didn't need to raise my voice or throw his insults back at him. The silence between us was louder than anything I could have said. He packed his things under the eyes of relatives who had once stood firmly in his corner. Now, those same people whispered about his arrogance, about the way he had twisted the truth. They saw the bitterness that had driven him, and it was ugly. When the last box was carried out, Jake lingered for a moment on the porch. His shoulders slumped, and his pride seemed to collapse with him. He didn't speak. He didn't apologize. He simply walked away, leaving behind the house he had fought so viciously to control. Inside, the mood shifted. Relatives who had doubted me earlier now approached with hesitant words. Some offered apologies, others simply nodded in quiet acknowledgement. No one celebrated, but there was a recognition that the truth had prevailed. They finally understood what I had known all along. Jake's cruelty wasn't born from grief. It had been there for years, waiting for a chance to surface. The victory wasn't about property or bricks and mortar. It was about dignity, about reclaiming what had been stolen from me in that moment at the funeral when Jake tried to erase my place. Sitting in the living room later that evening, surrounded by the familiar walls Mark had once painted, I let the stillness settle over me. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home again. Quiet justice burned in my chest. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't cursed. I had simply stood firm and let the truth speak for itself. And in the end, it was enough. Jake was gone, exposed for what he was, and I remained, carrying forward the love of the man who had raised me. The first evening I had the house to myself, the air inside felt different, lighter, though still heavy with memories. I unlocked the front door slowly, almost afraid to breathe, as if I might wake from a dream and find it taken away again. The familiar creak of the hinges greeted me, and I stepped into the quiet space that had once been filled with voices, arguments, and laughter. For weeks it had felt like contested ground, but now it was mine, not because of a court order, but because Mark had chosen it for me. I carried a small box in my arms, and at the very top was a framed picture of Mark. His smile beamed back at me, warm and steady, just as I remembered. I walked straight to the living room, to the mantel that had stood bare since the fight over the estate began. With careful hands, I set the frame in the center, where it belonged. The room seemed to change with that simple act. It wasn't just a picture, it was a presence. It felt like placing him back in the heart of the home he had built. I stood there for a long time, studying his face in the photograph. I whispered a thank you, not just for the house, but for the years he gave me, for the lessons that shaped me, for loving me without hesitation. This space would no longer be a reminder of battles fought with Jake. It would be a sanctuary, a place to carry forward Mark's memory the way it deserved to be carried. That night, I walked from room to room, touching the walls, letting the silence settle around me. In the kitchen, I could almost hear the echo of his voice asking if I wanted pancakes on a Saturday morning. In the hallway, I imagined him calling me down for dinner. Every corner spoke of him, not of loss, but of the life he had built and entrusted to me. Peace came slowly, like a tide inching its way to shore. For the first time since his passing, I felt a calm certainty. Jake couldn't take this from me. He couldn't rewrite the years, couldn't erase the bond, couldn't silence the truth Mark had left behind. No matter how loudly he had tried to claim otherwise, the house was mine, because my place in Mark's life had been real all along. Yet beneath that peace, a weight lingered. Revenge had never been the goal, but it had become unavoidable. Standing up for myself, forcing Jake out, proving my worth, it hadn't been sweet. It had been exhausting, bitter, and sad. But necessary. If I hadn't fought, his cruelty would have stood as the final word. Now, looking at Mark's photo glowing softly in the lamplight, I knew the fight was over. I wasn't celebrating. I was honoring. And in that quiet moment, that was enough. Sometimes people think family is something you're simply born into, like a label you can't change. But I learned it's not about blood or last names or who shares your DNA. It's about the people who stand by you, the ones who choose you day after day. Mark did that for me. He didn't have to step in, didn't have to take on the role of father when he married my mom. But he did. And he did it fully, without hesitation. He showed up for me in ways that shaped the person I became. And no one, not even Jake, could ever take that away. Looking back, the fight with Jake wasn't just about property. It was about something far bigger. My place in the life of the man who raised me. Jake tried to deny it, tried to erase me from the story, but he failed. The truth was stronger than his bitterness. And though I never wanted a battle, I had to fight one. Because staying silent would have meant letting him win. And letting him win would have meant losing the bond that mattered most. Justice, when it finally came, didn't feel like victory in the way I expected. There was no moment of triumph, no rush of sweetness. It was quieter than that. It was the stillness of walking through the door without fear. It was the sight of Mark's photo resting where it belonged. It was knowing that the lies had been stripped away, leaving only the truth. That quiet truth burned deeper than any gloating ever could. I carry scars from the whole ordeal, emotional ones you can't see. Being humiliated, doubted, and pushed aside left marks I'll never forget. But I also carry proof that strength can grow in the unlikeliest places. I found mine when I stood firm, even when it felt like the whole world was against me. I found it when I refused to let someone else rewrite my story. To this day, I don't think of what happened as sweet revenge. Sweet suggests enjoyment, and there was nothing enjoyable about losing Mark or fighting his son. But it was necessary revenge, necessary to protect what was mine, necessary to honor the love he gave me, necessary to set the record straight. Now, when I sit in the living room, I feel the weight of survival more than the sting of betrayal. I survived Jake's cruelty. I survived the whispers, the doubt, the courtroom tension. And I came out standing in the place that was always meant to be mine. So when people ask me about family, I tell them this. It's not about who shares your blood. It's about who shows up, who loves you without condition, who chooses you again and again. Mark was my father in every way that mattered, and nothing, not loss, not lies, not cruelty, will ever change that. Do you think I made the right decision standing my ground against Jake, or should I have walked away instead? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.